Welcome on into OneSoccer today, everybody. Andy Petrillo, Gareth Wheeler, Oliver Platt. These two guys put in a shift yesterday, and so did you, the fans. That's right. We know you watched the CPL championship game between Forge FC and Pacific, and you know we're breaking this one down right here because for the first time since the league's existence, there is a new winner. Yes, Forge FC captured the first two North Star Shields. Now it's Pacific FC, your champions. 1-0, the final in that one. Ollie, have some time to digest this one. Alessandro Hojabrpour getting the goal. What do you make of Pacific being crowned the champions?
Yeah, I think for me, like I've just never seen Forge, especially in that second half, look as kind of flummoxed as they were in that game, and that's a credit to Pacific and the approach they took. Like you think back to some of the, I guess, failures, if you want to call them that Forge have had. Arkai, they didn't actually lose, they lost on penalties. Matagua, they didn't actually lose, they lost on away goals. Montreal in the Canadian Championship, they lost on penalties. You know, there's been times where they've not necessarily actually been beaten, but they've gone out of competitions. But yesterday they were beaten. They were beaten by Pacific, and a Pacific team that I think really surprised them in a lot of different ways. Like Pamadou Carr had been talking about all week, we're going to be ourselves. You know, we're going to play our football as we have done all season. Top scorers in the CPL. They did nothing of the sort, you know, and I think that took. I don't think that was what Forge were expecting. It was the right game plan. We had questions at half time. Are they showing enough in attack? But they had a plan. They stuck to it. They saw it through, and they're deserving champions.
I'm surprised for a couple reasons. No Diaz and Bustos playing. Two of their best players playing. They played 2 games in a month. Like literally the schedule just worked out. They played 2 games in a month. So I wasn't sure what to expect from them, to be honest. Because in games over the course of the Canadian Premier League season, it seemed like when teams would have more time off, they'd come out and lay an egg. That wasn't the case here. They came out ready to play. But perhaps I shouldn't be surprised because this was the 40th game that Forge played since June 27th. That's a game every 4 days with ridiculous continental travel in between. And maybe we should have sat there and thought about this a little bit more, that Forge was getting back home at, Friday morning and then preparing for a cup final in 48 hours? So perhaps we shouldn't have been surprised. This was the best team in the Canadian Premier League over the first, 2/3 of the season? Yeah. Like, they were that good. They were legitimately that good. They're that well coached. They have very good players. They committed to their system. So yeah, it was surprising to me, but perhaps it shouldn't have been.
So I want to be careful how I word this because I think every team has their trials and tribulations, but sometimes if you emphasize those too much, it can take away from the accomplishment of the team that won. But here's the thing, when you look at Forge, did their schedule finally catch up to them in that final game? But then the reason why I say I want to be careful is because then you say, well, I mean, did Pacific then just get lucky? But to your point, Ollie, I mean, they really did outplay them. So how do you view this? When you look at Forge, what went wrong for them? Were they truly beaten by Pacific, or do you see it as a case of schedule catching up?
They were beaten by Pacific. Like, Pacific are worthy winners here. There's no doubt about that, but that's played a massive role. I get a sense from the Forge side of things, they're relieved that this season's done. Like, this has been an incredible grind. Like, even if they had advanced in CONCACAF League, just the thought of playing more games, I think it was daunting for this group. Like, a player like Kwame Awu has played 38 games. He's played 38 games. Like, of course, it's absolutely caught up to him. It's not playing in, in a CONCACAF competition. It's in a COVID year when everything's shrunk down. Like, 2021 has been crazy. All the players in this league deserve an incredible amount of credit for what they've endured, what they've gone through, the coaching staffs, the administrative staffs, everyone, the work that they've done. But it's hard to say when you look in the span of time that Pacific is, again, played 2 games, Forge played 8 games, and was coming back from Honduras ahead of this cup final. These were extremely difficult circumstances, but full credit. Pacific changed their model of play. They changed the way that they played in the final, and their game plan worked to an absolute T. So yes, it's an absolute factor, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, that's the thing. They got it right. Like there were circumstances that helped them. There were also circumstances that went against them, like Diaz. But the one, where they did have an edge and they had a few favourable circumstances, they used them, right? And I don't think I would say that it caught up with Forge physically, because I think it's a final and it's 90 minutes, and they will be okay on that front. But like when you do look at the fact that Pacific had 2 weeks to prepare and Forge flew back into into Hamilton, at the end of the week and had a couple of days, that is an area where Pacific will have known that is a big advantage for us potentially. It could be a disadvantage if we use it the wrong way because of rustiness and things like that. But if we get it right, if we have a plan and we use that time, that can really be a big thing, and Parma-Dakar got it spot on.
Because it could have gone the other way, where the rust could have played a role, but they didn't let it play a role whatsoever. So full credit to Pacific.
Yeah, and to your point, missing two pretty significant players as well in that final. I want you to fill in the blank for me here, Ollie. Pacific doesn't win the CPL final without in the team.
You can name a few names here. Obviously, Hajabrapur is the obvious one, but I'll go with Lucas McNaughton. Having missed the semi-final, the way he came back in and played, in the centre of that defence, I thought he was outstanding. And again, when we talk about the potential rustiness, he hadn't played since October because of that suspension and because of the massive gaps they've had between games. So, that centre-back position for them was one we looked at the start of the season. I think most of us thought they could do with an addition there, a real experienced leader of the back line, someone like a David Edgar that, other teams like Forge have had. They didn't go that way. They went with Samake, who I thought was one of the most improved players in the league. They were without Meir Jaguar, which you would have thought would make the situation worse, but got him back at the right time at the end of the season. And Lucas McNaughton was one of the top defenders in the league. So all of that group takes a lot of credit, but McNaughton in particular.
Pacific doesn't win the CPL final without Jamar Dixon in the team. It's a very young group of players. You need those experienced, tried, tested, and true players in the team to lead the way. He is a Canadian soccer success story, 32 years of age, plying his trade, back in this country, playing professional football after time in Scandinavia, after time in USL. This guy, the work that he's put in, the commitment that he continues to show, it's exemplary. It is a Canadian soccer success story. And as much as this is a league about development, you need these experienced players to help see through their difficult times. Look what that means to him and his head coach. They know the grind. They know the work that it takes. I'm sure there's been times in recent years he's probably questioned, is it time for me to go move on to do something else? And other players in this league will do the exact same thing. But he's remained committed to that group. Him and Hajabrapur in the central midfield were excellent over the course of that game. Throw Aparicio, he shifted out in the latter stages of that game. But Dixon plays a huge role, and I'm not sure we talk about players like that enough in this league.
Yeah, that was a great hug. That got me a
great hug.
Wee bit dusty in here a little bit watching that. All right, so
who's cutting the onions?
Yeah, who's doing that? Now this is a conversation we've been having for many years, but in particular when it comes to MLS Canadian teams, right? Because you go on, you win the Canadian Championship, and then you go into CONCACAF Champions League, and then you kind of have this question of, well, what do you pay more attention to, right? Because now you're being split. It's a really busy schedule. Most recent vintage, of course, is 2018 Toronto FC going all the way to the final, and then they ended up having a dismal MLS season. So I wonder then, Gareth, are we having this conversation now with Forge FC? Did they put so much into CONCACAF League? Again, that it just, did not result in them winning the hat trick here.
But I think a lot of that had to do with the COVID year. I don't think it's the CONCACAF League or Champions League that was the problem this time around. What will be interesting and what's going to be way more difficult is 2 months from now, Forge is going to be playing the CONCACAF Champions League.
That's crazy.
In February, a quick turnaround. But then when the CPL season, Ollie probably knows better than me, starts in April.
April probably, yeah.
So you start up, you're building up. They're going to be playing a top-ranked team in that competition. Grind to a halt again, or do you continue training, building towards the season? That's what's not easy. 2022 is going to throw another curveball their way. And for Pacific as well, that are going to be playing in this continental competition as well.
Yeah, that's something the league needs to think about, and I don't blame them at all this year because it was what it was, right? And it couldn't be helped. But going forwards, we're going to have Pacific and CONCACAF League next year, which is fantastic to see a second Canadian Premier League team in continental competition, Forge in the Champions League, obviously. Then the format changes and we get 2 CPL teams in the Champions League, which is going to be massive. The league has to help these teams, right? Structure the season in a way that allows these teams to put everything they have into continental football without sacrificing their chances in the league, because it's so important that we're competitive internationally. Like, I agree totally with Bobby Simoniotis on this. If we're not, trying to be competitive in these competitions, we're not taking these competitions seriously, what's the point? Why are we doing it?
So what
right?
do you do? What would you recommend? What do you think?
Well, there's a ton of things, right? It's about making sure there's the right amount of space in between games. You're not having to travel back from Central America or someplace like that and play a big CPL game at the weekends. Trying not to congest the schedules in certain periods of the season.
But that was this year, right? Like, I don't foresee that being an issue next year.
Hopefully not.
With a regular schedule.
Not as much, but it has been for MLS, I think, even in normal years.
It has been, but I think it's been the same problem for MLS, them playing in the Champions League to kick off their preseason.
Yeah.
I think that's the bigger issue, how you bridge that gap. So do you have a preseason tournament in a warm location where you continue that build? Maybe you go and play somewhere warm and have your own bubble without all the having to stay in your actual physical bubble like Winnipeg, but play a tournament at a remote location, then kick off your home campaigns across this country when the weather gets better in April. Like, maybe that's the way to do things.
It's definitely a bigger question for the whole continent, like with Liga MX playing in the different calendar.
It's not just CPL.
Yeah,
Look at us looking ahead when Forge is probably like, can we just chill for a second? And Pacific, can we just enjoy this moment?
Yeah.
That's right. CPL Championship celebrations continue on the show. We're also going to the stock market. We're going to see what these guys are buying and selling. Bobby, outcoached, Aparicio, best offseason signing. Let's discuss.